My name is Jim Hayland, and I'd like to welcome you to the Lake Forest Graduate School of Management Operations Management class, which is Management 5230. As you know, the class is online, so we'll be depending quite a bit on Blackboard, and I hope you've had a chance to review the introduction video that kind of summarizes the structure within Blackboard and where you'll find the various elements that you'll need to familiarize yourself with to complete the class. This video is particularly talking about the first session of the class, the first week, and some of the topics that we'll cover in the first week in the content of Blackboard. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to take a look at this. Some people, as I know, learn different ways, so maybe a video and a slide set is going to help you along the way, so that's why we're here. So again, welcome to the class, and we'll get started. So I want to start with a quote. You can't do today's job with yesterday's methods and be in business tomorrow. This is kind of obvious. As you know, the world is changing, constantly changing. The fact that you're on an online class is a change. Wasn't that long ago that an online class was unlikely. The most you saw was maybe a videotape class, but now with the internet and the technologies that are available to all of us, the technologies have changed and the methods have changed, and so as a result, businesses have to keep up and transition along the way. So the first step is that in Blackboard, at your earliest opportunity, I'd like you to go into the discussion board and introduce yourself. Talk about whatever you're comfortable with. If you want to talk about your employer, your position in that company, what your familiarity is with operations management, any personal tidbits you want to add, feel free, and I look forward to reviewing those in the coming week. So for today, we're going to talk about a number of things, including availability for me, the syllabus, MIS class guidelines, which don't apply to this class, and then the different elements of operations management, and then the plans for the coming week. As I said before, my name is Jim Hayland. I'm sharing with you my cell phone, which is 847-514-7136. Please don't use it carelessly, but again, I'm here to help you be successful. And so if you have a question, I typically are easy to get a hold of by email. I will usually respond to any emails on a daily basis. But if you do need to give me a call, feel free. So my email address is here, and basically send that to, or you can send me an email by way of the Lake Forest Blackboard site. My response time, my commitment is 48 hours, but like I said, in general, I'm going to be responding more quickly if at all possible. There's two textbooks for the class, Operations Management, a large textbook by Heiser and Render, and then a smaller book by Eliyahu Goldratt called The Goal. I think you'll find both of these useful. The large textbook, Operations Management, contains a lot of detail, a lot of information that you can use and that you can go in and take advantage of. Different equations, different processes, flow charts, etc., that you might find useful on the job once you familiarize yourself with them. The second book is a little bit different. The Goal is more of an easy read. It comes off as more of a story than a textbook. It talks about an individual who is an operations manager, follows basically day in the life, but more than one day, and follows them through some personal issues, some business issues, etc., and he uses a number of techniques that you might find useful. And so I think, a good presentation of the material, because you get to see how someone might use the particular techniques and methods in real life. So talked about that. We've got a schedule in the overall class. As you know, we're starting on the 9th. The first session is the 9th through the 15th, and then every week thereafter up to January, February, March 4th is the last day of class. Along the way, we'll have a total of 8 modules. You can see the breakdown here. But in general, within Blackboard, you'll see basically a step-by-step, almost a cookbook of the things you need to do and activities you need to follow. And so when you go through that, I think step-by-step, you'll be able to follow along. And of course, if you have any questions, you can post them on the discussion board for myself and other students, or you can email me directly if you have any private conversations you want to have. And again, ultimately, my cell phone is available. So Starting with the subject, the three functions of business and performance impact. So when we think about a business, your primary goal is to be successful. And for a lot of businesses, one of the elements of success is making money. So a large part of operations management is wrapped around how do I make the right decisions that are going to make the most money, the best profits for the company in the short term and the long term while making and meeting my other operational goals. So we get an idea here, and this is a simple analysis where we talk about some different ideas. And I'm not going to go into the detail of the options, what the detail is behind these options, but the idea is I've got three different options on the table. I've got a marketing option, a finance accounting option, and an operations management option, OM being short for operations management. So I look down here, I see the different impacts: sales, cost of goods, gross margin, financial costs, subtotals, taxes, and then finally the total contribution. In other words, the bigger the number for the contribution, the more money I'm making and the more successful that option has been. And so if you look at this, I'm currently adding about $10,500 to my contribution. My first alternative to increase sales revenue, $18,000, reduce finance costs, $12,700, and then production costs, $22,500. And I show this example because in my experience, a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times, the best success you're going to get is by way of an operations management activity. Why? Because a lot of times operations management, because it spans the entire broad scope of an organization, there are many opportunities, especially in eliminating disconnects, streamlining flows, eliminating waste, that can make a big difference for an organization and can serve as a good opportunity to make a difference. So what does an operation manager do? They have some basic functions: planning, organization, staffing, leading, and controlling. Planning is obvious. What do I want to do? What do I expect to do? What kind of profits do I want to generate? What steps am I going to take to make those happen? Once I have those plans, I have to organize around them, get the right people involved, get the right involvement of the organization. And then staffing, obviously. Leading, in other words, as a leader, how do you make these things happen? And then finally, controlling. Now, controlling is one that a lot of us don't like. As an operations manager for many, many years, I didn't care for it. But the whole idea of controlling is, it's basically, you've built a great highway, you've got a fast car. Controlling is hanging onto the wheel and making sure you stay between the lines and don't run off the road, or don't wander off into a different road that's not optimized. And that's kind of the controlling piece. Too many times in my career I've seen situations where, I've actually seen the same problem solved 5 times. In other words, we had a problem, we identified a solution, we fixed it, and then a while later we've identified a problem, it's the same problem again. And a lot of that is because of control. We put processes in place, we set up new methods, but we don't manage the organization and make sure those methods are followed. So when we look at it, the organization, as most of you know, you have to look at an organization as an open system. There's the things you can control. In this case, we're thinking about the things inside the yellow circle. There are things you can't control: inputs, outputs, external activities, external stressors, external impacts to your organization. So an internal thing might be, well, gee, how do you manage people? Who's assigned to what task? How do you manage your quality? Things like that. External impacts can be things like market changes. A storm hits one of your factories. One of your suppliers can no longer supply a key part. So it's an overall cycle, and you have to control as best you can your internal and be able to adapt to external impacts and the external environment. So when we think about this whole thing, we'll talk about this: your organization, your strategy and goals. How do you transform? So transformation in this sense is not how do I transform the organization. It's more or less how do I take inputs and resources and transform them into outputs. In a traditional factory sense, how do I take raw goods and turn them into a car or a desk or some product? In other cases, how do I take the inputs and resources being design, software, the capabilities of key talent, capabilities of suppliers, and turn it into a product, whether it's a physical product, a service, software, what have you, that is going to turn profit for the company. So I think about this, we often talk in terms of congruence. You've often seen the analogy of a bunch of people rowing, and if everybody's rowing together, we're going to make great progress. If they're not, you'll be going in circles or making no progress at all. So this really comes true when you work in the operation and you have the people, the critical tasks, the culture, and the formal organization all in alignment. You know, a lot of times you say people, and I've heard the comment before, well, if I ran the organization, things would be different. So in that case, you're looking at maybe the culture or the formal organization aren't in alignment with what needs to be done. This can happen. You know, things change. Maybe the organization doesn't keep up. Or maybe part of the organization is running one way and part of the organization is running a different way. So the whole idea is you have to take each of these pieces, analyze them, and then make sure they're in alignment. So critical tasks are things like component tasks, workflows, processes. And so by critical tasks, typically we talk about value-added processes. In other words, if I'm doing something that's going to transform that input into something the customer wants, that's critical. If I'm doing something that's not directly associated with that, maybe it's not critical, or maybe it's something I really don't want to do anymore. And we have to look at those in the process. As far as people, we have to look at the HR capabilities, the competencies of the people you have. Many times, one of your least used capabilities are the people in your organization. Maybe you have people with skills that have gone untapped, that could do other things or expand their skills where you haven't taken advantage of that. When we talk about culture, culture oftentimes drives everything. You know, if you want to make a change, culture oftentimes is what's going to stop you. Or if you want to make a change happen by transforming the culture, that's what's going to drive the way. So communications, networks, informal power, and informal roles. I don't know if you've seen this before, but I've seen in many organizations where you walk into a team and you get to know the people. And what do you find out? You find out maybe there's a manager, but in reality there's a handful of folks in the organization who are the informal leaders. I've seen this in times where you walk into a meeting and somebody says, hey, let's go do this. And everybody in the room looks at a certain individual for their response. Do they support the idea or are they going to oppose it? And these informal roles are part of culture and an important part. This is not a problem. This is just a reality and something you need to understand and work with. And then finally, the formal organization. What are the rewards? What are the career systems? You know, do you get rewarded for doing, quote, the right thing, or do you get rewarded for doing something else? And I've seen it so many times where the managers will get up and say, hey, we all want to do X, Y, and Z, but then when pay raise time comes or bonus time comes or promotion time comes, then people are getting rewarded for doing something else. I worked with an organization at one point in my career where we talked about the fact that we didn't want to have crises. We didn't want to manage by crisis and everything else. But at the departmental meetings every month, we would talk about John, who blew off his kid's birthday party because some emergency at work had to be dealt with. And he would get a bonus and lots of accolades at the department meeting. Well, what's the message? The message we're sending is we really kind of do like crisis. We reward people for how they respond. Now, is crisis going to happen? Can you avoid it all the time? No, you can't. But you don't want the single message to be that we reward people for, you know, how they manage this. So when we look at this, we need to understand and implement different processes and steps to optimize what's going on. And really, we have to take it back to the basics. What is our product? How is it made? How is making it done? Where will this happen? What will the place look like? A lot of times the place, we've seen this before, where you go into an organization, you walk into an office, maybe it's a sales center, maybe it's a repair facility, maybe it's a factory, and you could tell by looking at the physical embodiment of the structure what the process is going to be. You know, you can tell. You walk into a disorganized place, you know the product may not be the best quality. How much is to be made? This is an interesting thing, and we'll talk at length in one of the future sessions about inventory. And then, can you do all this? It's interesting because I've seen so many times where leadership will get up in front of the organization and say, put out a grand plan of how we're going to do all these great things. But at the end of the day, we either don't have the people, we don't have the resources, we don't have the square footage, whatever it is. Do we have everything to make this a reality? And if we do, when will we have it and when can we get it done? You know, one of the biggest things is really, can you meet your commitments? Do you promise something to a customer and then not be able to deliver? And so that's a big deal. So what do you do as a manager? You plan, you lead, you influence, you negotiate, and you communicate. And again, the influence and communication can tend to be one of the stronger things that you're going to work on. It's a thing that you're going to do. And we talked about this in formal organization. Again, it's an influence operation. So let me step back from that and say, okay, when we think about operations management, we've identified 10 major decision areas. This isn't everything, and some of these things kind of overlap, but the 10 areas are here. So starting at the top, we've got the service and product design, quality management, process design, location, layout, HR and job design, supply chain management, inventory management, schedule, and maintenance. And as part of this class, we're going to spend time on each one of these topics. And so just very briefly, service and product. The class is designed around whether you're delivering a specific product or delivering a service to a customer. We're going to work in both of those areas. Quality, obviously you know what quality means. Does the service meet the customer's expectations? Does the product work out of the box? The process, how am I going to deliver that service, or how am I going to create and deliver that product? Location, where am I going to do this? And we'll talk about the differences in service and versus products for location. Layout within the facility, how are things organized? HR and job design, do I have the right people? How do I define the jobs? Supply chain management, none of us works in a vacuum. Most of us have suppliers that are key to us. We may have distributors that we work with. How do I tie all those pieces together? Inventory management, keeping track of the goods, whether it's components to build product or the finished goods. How do I manage all that? Scheduling, again, timing of the process. And then finally, maintenance. A lot of people think of the term maintenance as being more or less like, the guy that's sweeping the floor and the guy that's oiling the equipment. But maintenance really has a broader goal. And the goal of maintenance is really, once I set up a process, how do I keep it there? How do I maintain it? And that's what really we're going to extend the definition of maintenance to mean. How do these pieces fit together? Company strategy is key. I start with the company strategy. What is my reason for being? Why does my company exist? I have finance and marketing over here, but then I have this thing called a SOCA, two separate gears driving the whole thing, and I see my 10 decisions of operations management around the outside. So all these things have to be coordinated. We talked about that cohesion in the beginning, about how do I tie all these pieces together. So when you think about this, well, I want you to think about in your own mind, how do these 10 decisions vary if I'm doing service versus a product? So if I'm a service manager or an auto manufacturer, so think about the last time you went and had your car worked on. How do these decisions affect that overall process versus, for example, the manufacturer of that car? So if I had the Jeopardy music in the background, this would be a perfect time for it. So here's some ideas, some ideas of how those things differ. So the design of goods, the product is tangible. Services, product is not so clear. There's a new range, attributes, smile, nice color. So I always think about the example of a restaurant, the server who brings your food, takes your orders, whatever. Think about the product. What is the product? If you're in a restaurant, the product is a combination of things. It's the food, it's the environment in the restaurant, the cleanliness, it's the way the people treat you. And so in many cases, it's not so tangible. Is the food good? Well, different opinions. I can take a product, like a physical product, and go, does it meet the measurements? Does it go as fast as it's supposed to? Is it the right color? I can measure those things. But from a service standpoint, did the server do a good job? Did the customer leave happy? Was the food to their liking? And again, so many variables that are a little bit tougher to assess. Quality in the same way, we think about the product meeting physical standards, whereas a service is more of an experience. Process, the customer is typically not involved in the process of creating goods. Not always the case, but in general, when you are, like, for example, if you buy a car, you typically don't go to the factory and look at them slapping the tires on and putting the windows in and putting the paint on the body. You're pretty much involved in the final steps of that process. But for example, with a haircut, you're involved every step of the way. The moment you walk in, the haircut is delivered to you, on you, and basically you're there every step of the way. Location. I can put a product, with the modern shipping capabilities that I have, I can put the factory almost anywhere in the world. On a service, on the other hand, sometimes yes, but most times not. So a lot of times with services, use the haircut example. If you're sitting in Chicago, I can't have the barber in Boston and effectively deliver a haircut to you. I can have a product built in Boston and shipped to Chicago, different story. Layout again, has to be near the customer, has to involve the flow of the customer. HR and job design. Again, product is typically labor, the traditional labor force. Different skills, different technologies, whatever. As far as HR with a service, a little trickier. Does the barber do a good job giving you a haircut? Are they friendly? Are they nice? Are they pleasant to be around? More difficult to really assess. And then supply chain. Supply chain of the product, again, think about moving a product around the world, but on a service, little different view. Inventory. One of the things we think about, like, again, sticking with the haircut example, I can have an inventory of hair products. I can have scissors, clippers, chairs, whatever. But in general, I don't have the traditional sense of inventory, like parts and tires and engines like I would with a car. So it's a little different environment. And then scheduling. Scheduling, a lot of times, when I have difficulty with scheduling, I adapt with inventory. To use an example of a car, can I build the car such that I can drop it off at the dealership the moment that the customer wants to pick it up? Not always. So what do? I build inventory, either partially built cars or completely built cars, and they pile up on lots or at the dealer or what have you. Service, on the other hand, can I build up haircuts in advance? Not really. So a little trickier as far as scheduling, so I have to make sure that I can do this right when the need is there. And then maintenance, finally. Again, production maintenance, service maintenance, whatever I have to do to make sure that the service is delivered consistently or the product. Again, the 10 questions going down on the left, different questions, different opportunities. I'll let you take a look at these. And then strategy. Can't talk right now. I'm discussing strategy with our financial consultant. And we've all been there. We all know how strategy works, and sometimes it seems like it doesn't work. And you wonder sometimes if it just comes out of the air somewhere. So we have this thing of which comes first, the chicken or the egg, the strategy or production. And this is always a different thing, because a lot of times, philosophically we talk about, well, you start with a company strategy and then you add your capabilities based on that. But think about it. If I have a strategy but I have absolutely no capability, that's kind of a wasted time. If I have production without a strategy, well, I'm busy, but I don't know where I'm going. So I want those together. So there's always this argument about which comes first. So it kind of comes together. It becomes almost a cycle where you look at your strategy, look at your production, define your production, but then maybe update your strategy, and then maybe add to your production to fill gaps in, as far as fulfilling your strategy. So these things, work together. It's not typically a waterfall approach for this. So when we think about this, again, we've talked about congruence, all these pieces tied together, and that's really how your strategy and your production have to tie together. So like I said, you start with your mission. Where are you going? What's your reason for being? Why did you, if you're starting your own company, why did you start the company? It's interesting because we talk about like the Constitution. What do the founders mean? If you go to a major corporation that's been around for a while, a lot of times they point back to the founders of the company. Mr. Galvin in the case of Motorola, Mr. Ford in the case of Ford Motor, Mr. Edison, all the original people, Mr. Hewlett, Mr. Packard for HP. And a lot of times you look back and go, why did they do what they did? Why did they get some people together and invest their time and money to try and create a company? What was their purpose? And a lot of times they have a mission, they have a vision of where they want to go. It's not just, hey, I think we can sell cars. It's, I want to be able to do this. Ford, for example, the early mission was, I want to make cars available for everybody. So I'm going to mass produce a car and make sure that everyone can afford it. So what is your purpose for being? What are the boundaries of that purpose? That's an interesting thing because, a lot of us would think, well, I don't want to have boundaries. This thing will be perfect for everybody. But in reality, I have boundaries. Am I going to do this for the world? Am I going to do it just for Illinois, just for Mexico, just for Chicago? Where is my purpose? Who are the people I'm going to try to affect with my product? And again, what do we provide society? Because in a lot of cases, if you have what I would call a short-sighted view that says, I'm just in this to make money, well, it's a different beast. And I would question that maybe that's not your best path for success. But if you're making a difference for society, again, like Ford said, I want to make transportation available. I want to open people's worlds up. That's a different thing. So when I think about the mission, I look at this. What is the philosophy and values, typically of the people, the founders, the leadership, profitability and growth? Well, let's be honest, in the modern world, if I can't make money doing it, if people won't pay me to do it, or I can't get money somehow, I'm not going to be around very long, unless I've got a whole boatload of money supporting me, but eventually that's going to run out. Public image, do I want to have something that people look at, that my employees can be proud of, can go home and tell their kids that, hey, I did this today, whatever. Again, benefit to society. Who are my customers? If there's no one is going to take advantage of this, I'm not going to be successful. And then finally, environment. And environment is not in the sense of being green. It's environment as in what is the environment of the economy of the world that you're in. If the overall environment is negative towards what you're trying to do, it's going to be a little tougher to be successful. Here's an example. This is the mission statement for FedEx, which you can see I've got a people service profit philosophy. Now let's be honest, they got the word profit right up front. I got to make money doing this. If I don't, I can't reinvest in new processes and systems. I can't make things happen. If nothing else, I can't pay my employees, and people aren't going to stick around for very long. They're going to produce. They're going to be competitively superior. Global. Again, we talked about the scope of what you're doing. Air-ground transportation of high-priority goods. And we have completely satisfied customer, VOC, or the voice of the customer. With Merck, Merck's provide society quality of life. In other words, am I providing medical supplies, drugs, what have you? No, I'm here to make people's lives better. And again, focus on the customer or the voice of the customer. Strategy. Strategy is the next tier down. I've got my mission, whatever it is for your organization. Maybe you've been told what it is. It's hanging on a plaque on the wall as you walk in the office. But I've got that mission. Strategy is, what am I going to do to achieve that mission? What am I going to do to make sure that happens? So what am I going to do differently? So if I look at the competition, am I going to focus on the competition? Am I going to copy the competition? Or how am I going to differentiate myself from the competition? What is my strategy? And then this would be a business strategy, but then again at a high level, and then within each organization you have to have a functional strategy. So in other words, if my business strategy is to do a certain thing, what is my factory strategy? What is my sales strategy? What is my financial strategy? Whatever. And again, as I mentioned before, all these things have to be congruent. There are a lot of strategies out there, and mixes and matches and blends thereof, but there are three common. And I'll give you a second to think about it, but there are three that are the most common. And before I share that with you, give those a second. We'll have another Jeopardy moment. Oh, that was a quick Jeopardy moment. The first one is differentiation. So I'm going to be different. If you think about some companies that are different, maybe you've named these when you're thinking about this. But think about FedEx. When they came onto the market, everybody was kind of the same. However you shipped your products was pretty much the same. FedEx came in with a different approach. Higher speed, guarantees, better IT systems to manage the overall process. Cost leadership. Am I going to be cheaper than the next guy? Typically we don't talk cheap, we talk about greater value. So am I going to be cheaper? Think about the dollar store, Walmart, Target, some of these places where they say I'm going to be more economical than the competition, but still give you good value. It's not junk, it's good products, but at a less expensive price. And then finally, quick response. How quickly can I do things? Again, I can go back to FedEx and go, well, the whole idea of shipping next day, same day, overnight, these type of things. How quickly can I respond? That's why people are going to pay me more. So again, Are people going to pay me more because I'm different? I'm providing a different service? Because I'm cheaper, they're going to come in the doors, or because I'm more quickly able to respond to what people need. So let's start with differentiation. Everything that impacts the customer's perception of value. Think of Starbucks. Different organization, different structure, way more expensive. If you had taken my grandfather and told him that people would pay this much money for a cup of coffee, he'd have laughed at you. Because in his day, it was a nickel or a dime for a cup of coffee, and it was good enough. So again, it's all these other things that differentiate that environment. Are you competing on cost? Again, how do I get the best value for what's going on? And then response, flexibility, reliability, timeliness. So if I respond to you more accurately, good example of response, Apple Computer does very well with response. In their service organization, they are very quick, they deliver on time, they go out of their way to make their customers happy. So it's a differentiator for Apple. So if you look at this, you can probably guess which company this mission statement stands to. But look at what it says. It says we fulfill dreams through the experience of motorcycling. And the whole idea here is that, again, what are you trying to do? I'm trying to make a difference here. I'm trying to create an image in someone's head. And then through operations, if I want to be competitive in operations, taking it down to that next level, what do I do? I can do performance management, process, quality. I can differentiate myself. Years ago, the big differentiator was Six Sigma quality. Now we talk in terms of different quality awards that are available. How do I make something better? And the whole idea is, how do I make things different as far as how do I impact the customer? There's no point in making things different within the organization if it doesn't translate into something positive. If the employees are happier, do a better job, are more creative, that's great. If you're doing something different just for the sake of doing something different, it's a little tricky. So you really want to be able to tie these things out to the ultimate goal, to the ultimate customer. So strategy, success, increased ROI, return on investment. So I think about things, I think in terms within operations of high product quality, high capacity utilization, high operating effectiveness, low investment, low direct cost per unit are all some of the key items, some of the key financial metrics that I'm looking at. So strategic options leaders use to gain competitive advantage. Typically, as we were talking before in the first slide, operations management jumps out. And operations management is tightly linked to quality of service. And so we get that, obviously tied together. For a total of 44%, our type of, how you can make a difference with operations management. These are some of the steps, some of the processes, some of the elements of being successful with operations management. But when we do this, we have to understand what are the strengths and weaknesses of our competitors and other possible new entrants into the field. By new entrants, I mean new companies showing up trying to take away our customers and our money. The product life cycle and resources available within the firm or within the function. And this really ties back to what I said before, either the technologies, the equipment, or the people. If you don't have those items that can help you be successful in a new area or a new technology, you're going to have trouble. And then how do you make sure, the bottom line, that your operations management strategy is in alignment with the company's strategy? You're probably familiar with the Porter's 5 forces, but the whole idea is within it. I've got industry competitors, suppliers, potential entrants, buyers, competition among firms, and then substitutes. So for my product, are there other companies that are going to show up tomorrow? A lot of times you see this where a company, many times a supplier, might decide that, hey, they know your business as well as you do, and they're going to become a competitor. Buyers, again, how do I tie these things together? How do I get the product from the different organizations? Competition among firms, again, the whole idea of working with and against other companies to try and get the same customer base, and then the suppliers and the substitutes. Substitute is kind of an interesting thing. Simplest analogy is in the old days of people riding horses around. When the car showed up, that was a substitute. You may have had the best bred horses, the most well-fed, the most athletic, but when the car showed up, you had a substitute, someone that came with a new product that's going to make a difference in your space. Talked about the life cycle. You're probably familiar with this, but just as a reminder, products are born, products live, they mature, and they die. So you have a product, you can think of many examples. In this case, in this case you've got different examples: flat screen monitors, color printers, drive-through restaurants, fax machines, floppy disks. My guess is this floppy disk example is a little further down the curve even, because very few of you are probably still using floppy disks, if you have ever. Fax machines, still in use in some cases, but quickly declining. The internet, I don't see that going away anytime soon. I see the growth of the internet continuing unless something very unusual happens. But the whole idea is every product has a life cycle. It's created, it grows, it matures, and then it disappears. If you're smart, you've got the next product in line waiting in the wings so that when things start trailing off, your next product is ready to take its place. So we think about these different strategies. You've got different levels of strategy. You've got the overall company strategy. Maybe your company has different business units, and then within each business unit you're going to have the sales strategy, product strategy, supply chain, and then your sales, operations planning, procurement, manufacturing, logistics. All of these have to work together and support each other. So when we think about deploying strategies and implementation, you have to think about what are your critical success factors. What's success mean to you? If you're a restaurant, it's the parking lot's full on a Saturday night. Repeat business. If you're an accountant, that you've got a certain number of clients. If you're a company that you're selling so many units, or maybe it's market penetration. What are your core competencies? Okay, what makes you successful? Do you have, if you're a restaurant, do you have a chef who's better than anybody else? Do you have the best product? Do you have a great location? If you make a product, is it the best one out there? Does it work faster, lighter, cheaper, whatever? And then based on those competencies, you have to maintain the organization to support it. You know, again, if you have the best chef, you better take good care of that chef or have others in training to take over if something happens. And then how do you tie your operations management to all these other pieces? So the keys: voice of the customer, local versus global, process mapping, cost curves, and supply chain. So the voice of the customer is important. Do you know what the customer wants? Are you getting feedback from the customer? It's interesting because a lot of times companies lose their way. They think they know, and you know, I've heard the case a couple of times where companies have said, well, the customers don't know what they need. We know what they need. Well, I hope you're right, but that's a little dangerous as far as an overall strategy. So the voice of the customer, what do customers want? How do I tie it to different channels? By different channels, I mean I get different groups of customers, for example. If I sell a product, you know, go back to the car example. I might sell cars to people. I might sell cars as fleets to, I don't know, government agencies, for example. I might sell cars as fleets to taxi companies. Each one of those channels is going to have a different requirement, maybe a different set of needs. And then sales planning and execution. How am I going to make it happen? Do I have the right salespeople? And again, do I have the right salespeople in the sense of, are my salespeople delivering value to the customer and making sure the customer understands the value of the product and services that you offer? And then finally, how am I going to support those people? If I say I'm going to give you good customer support, how am I going to deliver on that? Do I have enough people to do the work? Do I have enough locations? Do I have a way to get the product or the service and the service people in one place to do the work? So a lot of different aspects of this whole process. So the voice of the customer, if you've ever participated in customer surveys, for example, or a focus group, it's open-ended questions and listening to responses. One of the hardest things for many people is actually listening to the customer. Because a lot of times as a company, you're going in here thinking, I think I've got something here the customers are going to love. And so there's a kind of a initial bias, you know, that you know, you're going to hear that they love the thing, where in reality they're saying, well, it's okay. But you know, through your ears, you're hearing, oh, it's you know, they love it, the product, they're going to really make a difference with it. And then you really need to understand it, and how do you tie this all together? So as a customer, when they're talking to you, you know, I mean, again, going back to the Starbucks example, when they listen to the customers, do the customers say, hey, I want a friendly place with a friendly person who gives me coffee and everything else? I don't know. If you think about the competition at the time, it was Dunkin' Donuts, or the neighborhood coffee shop. You walked in, you got your coffee, you got the heck out of Dodge. And so, you had to listen more deeply and understand your customers more thoroughly to really get that piece of information out of them. Next subject of globalization. Boy, this is in the news quite a bit. We've had, regardless of your politics, we've had different discussions about globalization. Varies as far as which party is in favor of it, which one is opposed to it, but one way or the other, we've got globalization. And it can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. So if you look at it and say, okay, I can sell product around the world, I can have product built around the world. So there's an argument that says a lot of jobs were lost to other countries where labor was cheaper. But if you're the company trying to compete in the global market, you say, well, gee, why don't I use the cheapest labor? Why shouldn't I do that? Especially with global logistics and the internet. I can send designs, I can send orders around the world, I can ship product around the world. It regularly amazes me that you can get a $5 item that was made in China. I don't understand how you can effectively ship something all the way from China for less than $5, let alone the value of the product itself. So again, these things really open up a lot of opportunities. But as I point out on the left, you've got tangible reasons and intangible reasons. Tangible reasons, like I said, cost, availability of people, availability of raw materials. Intangible goes back into other things, like a while back you would hear the term, made in USA. And there are certain countries where if you want to import a product into their country, a certain percentage of it, has to be built with local labor. That's a different beast right there too. So again, scale, service, and speed. How do I do this? We talked about the haircut example. Hard to do a haircut from somewhere else around the globe, but again, I can do other things. If I'm building product, I can build it just about anywhere and ship it just about anywhere, unless there's some reason. What comes to mind are things like systems for the U.S. government, where they're highly proprietary and they don't want the technologies falling into the hands of an opponent. So that's a different story. So again, strategic and unseen costs, business practices, legal, employee safety, intellectual property. One of the big complaints with a lot of globalization into foreign countries is your designs get stolen, your intellectual property is not well controlled. That's a risk. Political risk. Companies have had it where they've had a multi-million-dollar investment in the country, built a factory, built whatever, and then the local politicians come in and say, nah, we changed our mind. We now take this over. They park a few soldiers around your factory and it's now their factory. And there's not a whole lot you can do about it. And again, even if you do this, there are cultural issues, language issues, customs. And by customs, I don't mean the people at the border. I mean the people as far as local customs, how people behave and act and where their priorities are. Safety and other aspects that have to be tied out. Next is supply chain. We think about the strategy, the metrics, the human resources, the information management. So we think about supply chain is the end-to-end. Think about a chain. If you think about building a car, you start with iron ore in the ground, it turns into steel, ultimately turns into a fender, turns into a car, and out the door she goes. So the whole idea is I've got this whole chain. And in most companies today, they don't manage that whole chain. Well, they manage the chain, but they don't own the whole chain. They may own one aspect of it. So how do you tie all that together? How do you work with these other partners effectively to make this happen? How do you share information? How do you share data? If you have a quality problem with one of your suppliers, how are you going to work with them to make that happen? So a large part of this is tied out to what is called process mapping. In other words, the process of the supply chain turning raw materials and elements and component parts into the final product. I have to map that process. I have to understand that process. What are we doing? Where are the disconnects? How do I do this? What is the best-in-class process? How do I do this reliably? What do I do if something goes wrong? So it's entirely a key part of the process is to understand step by step what's happening and look for the disconnects and look for ways to optimize. And you can see in the cartoon, the example is that Post-it notes are very commonly used. The whole idea is I take every process that I'm aware of and put it on a post-it now, every step, and then I organize them. And it's interesting because I participated in these exercises a number of times, and often we find that there are gaps where, we used to call it the cloud where a miracle occurs. At this point, a miracle occurs, out comes the product. And that's because the people in the room didn't fully understand the process and couldn't delineate what was going on. So in summary, we've talked about a lot of things. We've had the introduction. We've talked very briefly about the syllabus, the types of things expected. Talked about operations and productivity, operations strategy in a global environment, and this SOCA DOM thing. And again, DOM stands for those 10 decisions of operations management. I guess there's a little O in there between the D and the O. And SOCA is really a two-term. It's really two terms, SO and CA. And SO is strategy of operations. The CA is competitive advantage. So in other words, if you have a strategy and you have a competitive advantage at fulfilling that strategy, you have a win-win formula to be successful. So again, spend some time going through this. Again, we covered Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Next time we will continue. Thank you for your participation. Again, please give me a shout anytime if you have any questions. Thank you, and have a great day.